I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two until the moment my boyfriend stood up in the middle of dinner and turned our relationship into a punchline. It happened last week at one of those absurdly expensive restaurants where the lighting is designed for Instagram, not conversation. 8 years together, and I still let him drag me into dinners with his crowd. The same group of men who filmed everything, narrated every bite, treated life like content, and people like props. The kind who ordered dishes for aesthetics, not hunger. We were halfway through a conversation I wasn't really part of, some influencer feud I didn't care about, when he suddenly stood, wineglass raised, voice loud enough to pull attention from nearby tables. "We're done." The room went quiet for half a second, long enough for my chest to tighten, long enough for my brain to stumble. Then I looked at his face. He was smiling. Not nervous, not conflicted, sparkling with mischief. His friends were already lifting their phones, faster than instinct, giggling like boys who'd been promised a show. Just kidding. The table exploded. Glasses clinked. Laughter shrieked. That sharp, performative kind that doesn't come from joy. It comes from cruelty, dressed up as humor. Everyone was laughing. Everyone except me. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching the man I'd loved for 8 years soak in their reaction like applause, watching him play to the room instead of looking at the woman who had stood beside him through every adult crisis of his life. Christmas mornings where his family made subtle remarks about my background, his mother's hospital scares, his father's funeral where he collapsed against me and I held him for 3 hours straight, career failures, financial stress, red-eye flights to see his sick relatives, every unglamorous moment. And in that restaurant, I wasn't his partner. I was his bit. So I folded my napkin carefully, placed it beside my plate like something finished. I reached into my bag, slid my credit card onto the table with a crisp bill beneath it, enough to cover everything and more. I stood up. No shouting, no scene, no tears. "Wait," he called, laughing nervously. "Babe, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke." I didn't turn around. Outside, the air was cool, quiet, real. And as the restaurant doors closed behind me, I knew, deep in my bones, that the joke had landed. Just not the way he thought. I was 49 years old when that dinner happened, though most people guessed younger. I'd learned early how to carry myself in a way that didn't invite questions. Straight back, steady eyes, no unnecessary explanations. I worked as a senior project engineer for a logistics firm, the kind of job that never made dinner party conversations exciting but quietly paid for everything to function. I liked systems. I liked things that worked because someone had planned ahead. He used to say that was what he loved about me. We met 8 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday party. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd almost canceled after a brutal week at work. But he struck up a conversation by asking about the watch on my wrist, my father's old Omega. He recognized it immediately, said his grandfather had worn the same model. That small, unexpected detail disarmed me. Back then, he was charming in a grounded way, confident but not loud, curious. He listened, or at least he seemed to. He worked in marketing, floated between agencies, always talking about potential, momentum, the next big pivot. I was the stable one, the anchor, the person who knew how to turn plans into reality. We moved in together after a year, slowly at first, a toothbrush, a drawer, eventually a shared condo that felt neutral enough for both of us. Clean lines, good light, a view of the city that made visitors say, wow. He loved hosting, loved the performance of it. I handled the logistics without thinking twice. Utilities, scheduling repairs, renewing leases, setting reminders. The imbalance crept in quietly. When his job contracts fell through, I told myself it was temporary. When I started covering more expenses, I called it partnership. When he forgot appointments or deadlines, I compensated without complaint. That was just how love worked, wasn't it? You picked up the slack when the other person stumbled. His friends came as a package. Loud, image-obsessed men who measured life in engagement metrics. They tolerated me at best. Sometimes joked that I was too serious, too old school. I smiled through it. I didn't need their approval. His family was harder, polite but sharp-edged. His mother asked careful questions about my upbringing that felt more like assessments. His father made comments about how independent I was, like it was something to be suspicious of. I absorbed it all quietly. I knew my place, even if no one ever said it out loud. The signs were there, if I'm honest. The way he checked his phone during conversations, the way he deferred to his friends' opinions instead of mine, the way our private moments slowly became content, stories, jokes, half-true anecdotes he shared for laughs. I ignored the discomfort. 8 years is a long time to admit you might be wrong. By the time we reached that restaurant last week, our relationship had already been eroding in places I didn't want to examine too closely. I told myself all long relationships went through phases. That commitment meant endurance. What I didn't realize was that, somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing me as a partner at all. I had become infrastructure. And infrastructure is invisible until it's gone. Looking back now, the dinner wasn't the beginning. It was the reveal. The real damage had started months earlier, in small moments that felt too insignificant to confront at the time. Tiny fractures I smoothed over because it felt easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. He had become distracted, not in an obvious way. He still came home, still kissed my cheek, still asked how my day was, though his eyes often drifted toward his phone before I finished answering. He started framing everything as content. Dinners weren't dates anymore. They were backdrops. Vacations weren't rest. They were shoots. "Just one more clip," he'd say, adjusting the lighting while my food went cold. I told myself it was his career, that I should be supportive. His friends grew bolder. Jokes at my expense slipped into conversations more often. Comments about my age, my seriousness, my energy. One of them once laughed and said, "You don't really fit the brand, you know." Everyone laughed, including him. That laugh stayed with me longer than it should have. At home, the emotional labor quietly shifted entirely onto me. I reminded him about his mother's appointments. I booked flights to visit relatives. I fixed what broke, both literally and emotionally. When he melted down after losing another contract, I listened for hours, offering reassurance while he spiraled about relevance and visibility. But when I had a bad day, he brushed it off. "You're strong," he'd say. "You always land on your feet." It sounded like praise. It felt like dismissal. His family began to mirror his behavior. His mother would casually ask whether I was still planning to work so much, or if I'd considered slowing down to support him more. As if my stability was somehow an inconvenience. I noticed how often he deferred to them, how rarely he defended me. And then there were the nights he came home smelling different. Not perfume exactly. Something expensive. Something curated. When I asked, he waved it off. Events, clients, you know how it is. I did know how it was. I just didn't want to name it. The most unsettling part wasn't suspicion. It was erosion. The slow sense that I was being edged out of my own relationship, replaced by an audience. That our private life had become raw material for his social ecosystem. I started feeling like a guest in the life I helped build. Still, I stayed quiet. 8 years teaches you how to rationalize almost anything. You tell yourself love isn't supposed to be easy. That discomfort is just growth. That silence is maturity. I mistook endurance for loyalty. By the time we sat down at that restaurant, with cameras already hovering and laughter preloaded, the dynamic was fully formed. I just didn't realize I was about to see it performed. The thing about public humiliation is that your body reacts before your mind does. When he stood up with that wine glass, my first sensation wasn't anger. It was heat. A sudden rush behind my ears, down my spine. My heart didn't race. It stalled, like it was bracing for impact. "We're done." For half a breath, I thought I'd misheard him. 8 years together doesn't prepare you for those words delivered like entertainment. Not in a crowded restaurant, not surrounded by people already smiling, already expecting the reveal. I looked at his face, searching for something. Nerves, guilt, hesitation. There was none. His eyes were bright, excited, performing. The pause stretched just long enough for me to feel exposed, like my insides were suddenly visible to everyone within earshot. I became aware of the table next to us going quiet. A fork hovering midair. Someone's chair scraping softly against the floor. Then he said it. "Just kidding." The explosion of laughter hit like a physical force. Hands slammed the table, phones tilted for better angles. Someone actually clapped. I watched his friends lean in, framing the moment, capturing my reaction, or lack of one, like it was part of the joke. I couldn't move. My mouth felt dry. My fingers tingled. I was aware of my breathing, shallow and controlled, the way it gets when you're trying not to give someone the satisfaction of seeing you break. I looked at him again. He still hadn't looked at me. Not once. He was soaking in the reaction, basking in it, nodding as if he'd just delivered a flawless punchline. And in that instant, something inside me went very still. I realized this wasn't carelessness. It was intent. He had chosen this, chosen the setting, chosen the audience, chosen to gamble our relationship for a laugh, and felt confident enough in my tolerance to assume I'd stay seated and smile along. That was the moment the past 8 years lined up in my mind with brutal clarity. Every joke at my expense, every boundary crossed just for fun, every time he'd said, "Don't take it so seriously." This wasn't new. It was just louder. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even confront him. I folded my napkin slowly, deliberately, as if precision itself could anchor me. I placed it beside my bread plate. I reached into my bag, pulled out my card, and slid it onto the table with a crisp bill beneath it. My movements were calm, controlled, final. That finally caught his attention. "Wait," he said, blinking. "Come on, babe, don't do this. It was a joke." Sensitive. That word landed heavier than the laughter. I stood up, feeling strangely weightless, like something essential had already detached. I walked away as his voice followed me, lighter now, uncertain. The laughter behind me faltered, then resumed, forced and thinner than before. Outside, the cool air hit my face, sharp and clean. I didn't look back, because somewhere between the toast and the punchline, I had understood something he never would. That moment wasn't a joke. It was a verdict. I didn't get into my car right away. The city at night felt different when I stepped onto the sidewalk. Quieter, almost conspiratorial. The restaurant's laughter leaked through the heavy glass doors behind me, distorted and artificial, like sound from a television in another apartment. It followed me for half a block before fading into traffic and wind. I walked, past boutiques with darkened windows, past a 24-hour diner glowing softly, where a tired mother fed a toddler pancakes at midnight, past people who had no idea my life had just tilted off its axis. My feet moved automatically. My mind did not. There was no dramatic inner monologue, no sobbing, just a growing coldness where confusion used to be. Each step peeled something away: hope, habit, tolerance, until what remained was startlingly clear. Around midnight, I caught my reflection in the blackened window of an antique shop. There I was, almost 50, a few gray strands at my temples, still solid, still standing. A woman who had shown up for 8 years without wavering. And I realized something that made my chest tighten, not with pain, but resolve. I had not been abandoned. I had been dismissed. I leaned closer to the glass and whispered, barely audible even to myself, "We're done." Not like he'd said it, not as theater. As fact. When I finally returned to the condo around 2 a.m, my phone was vibrating nonstop in my bag. Message after message lighting up the screen. "You're being dramatic. It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny. Don't ruin the night over this." I didn't open a single one. Instead, I moved with the calm efficiency I'd learned over decades of handling crises that didn't allow for emotion. I packed one duffel bag, only essentials: clothes, toiletries, my father's watch, the one thing I'd never leave behind, a folder of financial documents he'd always dismissed as boring adult stuff, and a framed photo of my daughter at her college graduation. I left everything else untouched. I placed my apartment key on the granite counter right beside the espresso machine I was always the one to clean. I didn't leave a note. The key said enough. Then I opened his laptop. Not to spy, not to rage, just to finish things cleanly. I transferred my portion from our joint accounts. Exactly what was mine. Not a cent more. Not vindictive. Conclusive. Our relationship, it turned out, was as informal legally as it was respected emotionally. I deleted our shared calendar, removed my photos from our couple's social media, erased the digital evidence of a life that could apparently be reduced to a punchline. By the time I zipped the bag, my phone went into airplane mode. I drove across town to a friend's place, someone who understood the value of disappearing when necessary. I left my phone in his kitchen drawer and slept for the first time in weeks without waiting for another notification. By morning, I was gone. Not stormed out, not threatening, not dramatic. Just finished. And for the first time since that dinner, the silence felt like relief. He woke up that morning, expecting routine. The soft hum of the coffee maker I always set the night before, a half-asleep kiss on my way out. Maybe a passive-aggressive emoji if I was still sulking. What he found instead was silence so complete it rattled him. My side of the bed was cold. The bathroom counter, cleared. No skincare bottles lined up with military precision, no hair ties in the drawer. The faint citrus scent of my cologne, gone. He stood there longer than he meant to, blinking, as if the room might reset itself if he waited. Then he saw the key, placed carefully in the ceramic dish by the salt and pepper shakers we'd bought together in Italy 2 summers earlier. Not tossed, not hidden, positioned. Deliberate. The first message he sent at 7:58 a.m. was casual, almost playful. "Where'd you go, Houdini? Forgot your keys again? Coffee's getting cold." No reply. By 9, the tone shifted. "Okay, seriously, this isn't funny anymore. Call me." 3 calls followed. All went straight to voicemail. No ringing. That dead electronic certainty that tells you the phone is either off or gone. Panic arrived quietly. He checked the refrigerator out of habit, reaching for the labeled containers I prepped every Sunday. The color-coded meals. The grocery list magnetized to the door. All gone. What remained looked unfamiliar. Expensive salad dressings, half a bottle of rosé, almond milk he bought and never drank. At the office, he called my workplace. The receptionist, someone I'd personally trained, answered with polite efficiency. When he asked for me, there was a pause. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "She resigned yesterday, effective immediately. HR has a forwarding address for final paperwork." No explanation, no warning. By 11, he opened our banking app. My name was gone. Not frozen, not flagged, removed. The account label reverted to his name alone, like I'd never existed. The numbers were clean, balanced. I had taken exactly what was mine, down to the penny. The transaction looked routine, professional. That's what unnerved him most. If I'd drained the account, he could have called me angry. If I'd left chaos, he could have framed me as emotional. But this looked final. By noon, he started calling people, my friends, men he'd tolerated but never respected. The first didn't answer. The second lied poorly, claiming he hadn't heard from me in months. By mid-afternoon, he was pacing the condo, retelling the story to his remaining friends like it still had a punchline. "She just left, vanished, didn't even leave a note. Who does that?" His laugh cracked on the second sentence. That evening, desperation pushed him to a line he'd never crossed before. He texted my daughter. They'd never bonded. Too many years of subtle comments about real mothers and figuring things out. My daughter was 23, sharp, perceptive, and entirely uninterested in performance. "Have you heard from your mom? I'm really worried. This isn't like her." The reply came 4 hours later. "She said to tell you the punchline landed perfectly." That was when he finally cried. Not because he missed me, not yet, but because the infrastructure he'd leaned on, financial, emotional, social, had vanished without noise, without negotiation, without him. And for the first time, the laughter from that restaurant had nowhere to hide. People think leaving is the hardest part. It isn't. The hardest part is the silence that follows, when there's no adrenaline left, no logistics to manage, no next step demanding attention. Just you, alone, in a space that isn't yet home, staring at a ceiling that doesn't know your history. I stayed with my friend for 3 nights, slept on a guest bed with unfamiliar sheets, ate when I remembered, spoke only when necessary. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to fix anything. He understood that this wasn't grief that needed comfort. It was clarity settling into bone. On the 4th night, I moved into a short-term apartment across the city. Neutral, sparse, intentionally forgettable. I paid in advance, used a mailing address that wasn't tied to my name. Old habits that suddenly felt less like paranoia and more like foresight. That first evening alone, the quiet pressed in hard. No hum of shared routines, no low background noise of someone else's presence, just the refrigerator clicking on and off. The distant sound of traffic, my own breathing, louder than it had been in years. That's when it hit. Not the humiliation, not the anger, the exhaustion. 8 years of being steady, of absorbing, of translating chaos into order for someone else, of being the adult in every room while pretending it didn't cost me anything. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and finally let myself feel it. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a slow, controlled release. Tears came without sobs. My chest ached, not from heartbreak, but from the sheer weight of having carried so much without asking to be seen. For the first time, a question surfaced that I'd buried for years. When did I become optional in my own life? I thought about every time I'd softened a boundary to keep the peace, every moment I'd laughed along when something hurt, every excuse I'd made for behavior that chipped away at my dignity because it was easier than disrupting the story we were telling the world. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of myself who believed endurance was the same as love. That night was the lowest point, not because I wanted to go back, but because I couldn't yet see forward. The future felt vast and undefined, and for someone who thrived on structure, that emptiness was terrifying. But even then, something held, a quiet certainty beneath the sadness. I had not overreacted. I had not misunderstood. I had not thrown away something good. I had simply stopped accepting less. By morning, the tears were gone. My face looked older, but steadier. I made coffee, opened the blinds, sat at the small table, and wrote one sentence in a notebook. I will not explain my absence to people who applauded my humiliation. That was the moment I understood this wasn't an ending. It was a reset. The shift didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, the way truth usually does, when there's finally enough silence to hear it. On the fifth morning, I woke before my alarm out of habit. For a moment, muscle memory reached for my phone, expecting messages that no longer existed. Then I stopped myself. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Space. No one needed me to manage their emotions today. No one needed rescuing. No one was waiting for me to make their life function. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. And for the first time in years, my thoughts weren't circling him. They were circling me. That's when I saw it clearly. The dinner hadn't been the betrayal. It had been the confirmation. He didn't disrespect me because he was careless. He did it because, over time, I had been repositioned in his mind, from partner to fixture, from woman to utility. Someone safe to embarrass because I'd always absorbed the impact before. The turning point wasn't rage. It was relief. Relief that I no longer had to negotiate my worth, that I didn't have to convince anyone that I deserved basic respect, that the decision had been made cleanly, without bargaining, without pleading, without one last conversation designed to soothe his conscience. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a neutral source, someone who had no loyalty to either of us, a former colleague of his, calling under the guise of work, then hesitating. "I don't know if you want to hear this," he said carefully, "but people are talking." I almost laughed. Not gossip, not outrage, confusion. The story he'd told, the version where I was dramatic, oversensitive, unstable, wasn't holding. Too many inconsistencies. Too many people had seen the video. Too many had noticed how abruptly I vanished without chaos. Men who had laughed at the dinner were now uncomfortable. Women who'd smiled through it were quietly reassessing. No one likes realizing they applauded cruelty. The truth didn't need my defense. It was surfacing on its own. That evening, I did something symbolic, not for him, but for myself. I changed my email address, closed accounts I no longer needed, updated records, streamlined my life down to what actually belonged to me. I didn't erase my past. I simply stopped carrying what wasn't mine anymore. The realization settled fully then. I didn't want closure from him. Closure implies unfinished business. I was finished. I didn't need to confront. Didn't need apologies. Didn't need explanations retrofitted to soothe discomfort. What I needed, what I had already taken, was agency. And once you reclaim that, there's no going back to the version of yourself who waited for permission to leave. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They arrive the way rot spreads through a structure, quietly, invisibly at first, then suddenly undeniable. Within a week, his world began to wobble. He posted his usual Sunday brunch photo from the same overpriced spot, same filters, same caption about vibes and no drama. But there was an empty chair he didn't bother to crop out. The absence was louder than any caption. 2 of his regular friends were missing. One was tagged but never reshared, and Allie, his loudest encourager that night, looked pale, hollow, like someone who had just realized the joke wasn't funny anymore. Then the professional crack started. A mid-level brand collaboration quietly disappeared from his calendar. No explanation. Just a polite email about strategic realignment. The boutique that had sent him free products every quarter stopped responding. Discount codes expired. DMs went unanswered. Invitations dried up. He told himself it was algorithms, market shifts, bad timing. It wasn't. What he never understood, what he'd never bothered to ask, was how much of his curated life had been quietly supported by me. The reservations that always worked, the photographers who always made time, the introductions that smoothed doors open, the systems that made his chaos look like confidence. When I removed myself, the scaffolding went with me. Late one night, unable to sleep, he spiraled, scrolling, searching, hunting for proof I still existed somewhere he could reach. Instagram, gone. Facebook, deactivated. LinkedIn, wiped so clean it looked like it had never been there. Even old forums and niche groups I used to browse turned up nothing. That's when fear replaced arrogance. He started calling people from my past, old coworkers, neighbors, even a bartender I used to see twice a month. Most didn't answer. The few who did gave the same response. Haven't seen her in a while. Thought you were still together. The lie of control was collapsing. By Friday morning, exhausted and shaking, he called my cousin, someone he'd mocked publicly years earlier, but family felt like a last resort. Has she been in touch? He asked, forcing a casual tone. There was a pause. She's fine, my cousin said. Better than I've seen her in years. That was the sentence that broke him. Better? Not devastated, not spiraling. Better. He pushed for details, regretted it immediately. I was consulting now, low profile, under a variation of my own name, different structure, different pace, intentional anonymity, not hiding, choosing distance. When he hung up, he understood something too late. I hadn't left to punish him. I had left to protect myself. And while he was still trying to explain the joke to anyone who would listen, the truth was already moving through his world, quiet, unstoppable, and entirely indifferent to his spin. Healing didn't arrive as forgiveness. It arrived as alignment. Weeks passed, then months. My life didn't become flashy. It became quietly correct. I slept through the night, woke early by choice, ran along the river before work, lungs burning in a way that felt earned, not anxious. I read nonfiction again, cooked for myself, kept my calendar light and honest. I stopped bracing. One afternoon, while organizing documents, I found the old photo I'd brought with me. The snapshot of him laughing, taken before everything collapsed. For a moment I studied it, not with longing, not with bitterness, with distance. I folded it once, then again, and placed it in a drawer, not as a wound, but as a record. Proof of the moment I chose myself. I never posted a statement, never corrected the narrative, never defended my exit. The people who mattered understood. The ones who didn't were never going to, no matter how carefully I explained. Months later, I ran into him at an art gallery opening. I was standing beside an older woman, graceful, composed, and equal in every sense. We were laughing, genuinely. No performance, no audience. He froze when he saw me. Why? He asked, voice thin. Why all of it? I looked at him the way you look at a healed scar, without anger, without urgency. Because your laugh told me everything I needed to know. I stepped past him, not harshly, just finished. As I walked away, I felt something close to gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced, for the clean break, for the silence that followed. Here's the lesson I wish someone had told me sooner. If someone turns your dignity into entertainment, believe them the first time. If respect only exists in private, it doesn't exist at all. And when you leave, leave cleanly, without theatrics, without explanations, without asking permission. Silence, when chosen intentionally, is not weakness. It's power, and the right people will feel it long after you're gone.